Hey, Stack Lessons again. Today's batch is 20 questions, all covering cost management tools, resilience concepts, and storage durability. 10 seconds on the clock per question. Then the answer and a quick explanation. Pause when you need to. Let's dig in. Alright, question 1. Close is not correct. Tailspin Toys is building a multiplayer online gaming platform. Player session data, including inventory, game state, and authentication tokens, must be stored in memory for sub-millisecond access during gameplay. The team also requires that this session data survive application server failures and process restarts, so players are not forced to re-authenticate or lose progress during infrastructure events. Which AWS service should they use to store player session state? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. ElastiCache is fast but loses data on node failure. Amazon Memory DB for Redis is a durable, Redis-compatible in-memory database service that persists data across multiple availability zones using a distributed transactional log. Unlike a cache, MemoryDB provides microsecond read and single-digit millisecond write latency, while guaranteeing full data durability. Session data survives node failures, reboots, and infrastructure events without loss. Amazon ElastiCache for Redis is a caching service that prioritizes speed over durability. ElastiCache data is held in memory and can be lost during node failures or when a cluster is restarted because ElastiCache is architected for ephemeral cache workloads, not durable storage. The requirement that session data survive failures eliminates ElastiCache as a safe choice. Amazon DynamoDB Accelerator is an in-memory read-through cache designed exclusively to accelerate DynamoDB table read operations and cannot function as a general-purpose session store. Amazon RDS for PostgreSQL provides durable relational storage but does not deliver the sub-millisecond in-memory latency required for real-time gaming session access. Let's slow down here. Both options use Redis, but only one keeps your data safe. Imagine your game server crashes mid-raid with 10,000 players logged in. They all get kicked to the login screen and lose their progress. That's the nightmare this question tests. Both ElastiCache for Redis and MemoryDB for Redis are in-memory, Redis-compatible services. They look identical at first glance. ElastiCache is built as a cache, blazing fast, but if the node goes down, your data goes with it. MemoryDB is different. It logs every write to multiple availability zones before confirming. So when a node fails, your session data is still there. The question says data must survive failures. That word, survive, is your signal. ElastiCache can't guarantee it. MemoryDB can. That's why D wins. Alright, here is question 2. Adatum Financial Services is adopting AWS using the AWS Cloud Adoption Framework, CAF. The transformation team needs to establish audit controls, risk management processes, and application portfolio management before migrating workloads. Which AWS CAF perspective provides guidance for these organizational capabilities? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Governance covers audit, risk, and portfolio before migration. The governance perspective of the AWS Cloud Adoption Framework addresses audit and compliance, risk management, portfolio management, business process governance, and organizational change governance, exactly the capabilities Adatum's transformation team needs before migration. The business perspective focuses on business case development, financial management, and benefits realization from executive leadership viewpoints such as CFO and CEO. The people perspective covers culture, organizational structure, resource management, and training programs. The operations perspective addresses IT service delivery, application management, and infrastructure management for day-to-day operational functions, not governance controls. Okay, Question 3. The clue is not in the service name. A datam's infrastructure team is designing two separate systems. The first is an emergency alert notification service that must remain continuously operational with absolutely zero acceptable downtime under any failure condition. The second is an internal financial reporting dashboard where brief interruptions of a few minutes per month are acceptable. Which design approach correctly matches each system's requirement? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Zero downtime versus brief recovery. Those are different design philosophies. Fault tolerance is the design principle for systems that must continue operating with zero downtime even when components fail. A fault-tolerant system achieves this through full redundancy at every layer. No single component failure can interrupt service. The emergency alert service requires fault tolerance because any downtime, however brief, is unacceptable. High availability is the design principle for systems that minimize downtime to a very small level, typically measured as minutes per year, but accepts occasional brief interruptions within a defined SLA. The reporting dashboard fits high availability because a few minutes of monthly downtime is explicitly acceptable. Fault tolerance is more expensive than high availability because it requires redundant components that operate simultaneously rather than failing over. Elasticity and scalability describe the ability to handle varying load volumes and are not resilience design classifications. Multi-AS and multi-region are implementation mechanisms that can support either high availability or fault tolerance. Depending on how they are configured, they do not themselves define the design philosophy. Let's slow down here. Fault tolerance and high availability are easy to mix up, and the exam will test it. Imagine two hospitals. One runs the code blue alarm that pages surgeons when a patient flatlines. The other runs the monthly expense report dashboard. Both need to stay up, but not equally. Ask yourself, what happens if it goes down for 30 seconds? For the alarm, someone could die. That's fault tolerance. Redundant systems run in parallel, so a single failure changes nothing. For the dashboard, 30 seconds offline is fine. That's high availability. Minimize downtime, but a brief outage is acceptable. The exam trap. Multi-AS and multi-region are tools, not philosophies. Fault tolerance versus high availability is the design philosophy. Pick that first. Here we go. Question 4. One detail changes the answer. Litware Incorporated is launching a streaming media platform that must route users to specific AWS regions, strictly based on geographic location for content licensing compliance. Users connecting from Germany must be served only from the EU Central 1 region. Users from the United States must connect to US East 1, and all other users must connect to App Southeast 1. The routing requirement is based on where users are located, not on server health or network latency. Which Amazon Route 53 routing policy satisfies this requirement? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Content licensing compliance always maps to geolocation, not geoproximity. Geolocation routing directs DNS queries to specific resources based on the geographic origin of the query, allowing companies to map specific countries, continents, or subdivisions to dedicated endpoints or AWS regions. This makes it the correct policy for content licensing compliance scenarios that require strict enforcement of which users can reach which regional endpoints based on their physical location. Latency-based routing directs users to the AWS region that provides the lowest measured network latency from their location, which may route a German user to a different region if latency is lower there. This does not enforce geographic compliance boundaries. Geoproximity routing adjusts traffic distribution based on the geographic distance between users and resources and supports configurable bias values to shift traffic, but it is designed for traffic volume shifting between endpoints, rather than strict country-to-region compliance mapping. Weighted routing distributes traffic across multiple resources according to configured percentage weights, and has no awareness of the user's geographic location. Here we go. Question 5. Find what the distractors miss. ReliCloud's video production platform needs to select AWS storage services for two distinct requirements. The first requirement is high-performance persistent block storage for a single Amazon EC2 instance running a CPU-intensive transcoding application. The second requirement is a shared file system that allows dozens of EC2 rendering instances across multiple availability zones to simultaneously read and write large project asset files. Which two services should they select for these requirements, respectively? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option C. Two distinct storage problems need two distinct service answers here. Amazon EBS provides persistent, high-performance block storage volumes that attach to a single EC2 instance and deliver consistent, low-latency I/O throughput. EBS volumes are available in multiple performance tiers, including IO2 Block Express for the highest IOPs requirements, making them well-suited for transcoding applications that perform intensive sequential and random read/write operations on local storage. Amazon EFS is a fully managed, elastic NFS file system that can be mounted concurrently by thousands of EC2 instances across multiple availability zones. Multiple rendering instances can simultaneously read and write shared project assets without any application-level coordination, and EFS scales storage capacity automatically as data grows. This makes it the correct choice for a high-concurrency shared production file system. Amazon S3 is an object storage service accessed through HTTP-based APIs. It cannot be mounted as a traditional block device or file system volume, and does not support the POSIX file system semantics, such as random byte range writes and file locking, that a transcoding application expects from its primary storage. Amazon EBS volumes can only be attached to a single EC2 instance at a time in standard configuration. Multi-attach EBS is available for specific IO1 and IO2 volumes, but it is limited to a maximum of 16 instances within a single availability zone and requires cluster-aware applications that manage concurrent write access. It is not a general-purpose shared file system for dozens of rendering instances across availability zones. Amazon S3 Glacier is an archival storage tier optimized for data accessed roughly once per quarter with retrieval times ranging from minutes to hours. It is not appropriate for active rendering workflows that require immediate, repeated read and write access to large shared project files. The first 5 questions kept circling one idea: durability versus speed. MemoryDB survives failures. ElastiCache doesn't. Geolocation enforces hard location boundaries. Geoproximity shifts volume. And zero downtime means fault tolerance, not just high availability. Next up, question 6. The wording narrows the answer. A financial services company has a regulatory compliance requirement stating that all data transferred between its on-premises colocation facility and AWS must travel exclusively over a private network path and must never traverse the public internet. The company also requires consistent, predictable bandwidth for time-sensitive market data feeds. Which AWS connectivity solution satisfies both requirements? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Never traverse public internet eliminates every VPN option immediately. AWS Direct Connect establishes a dedicated, private physical network connection between a customer's on-premises or colocation facility and AWS. Traffic traverses Direct Connect partner or AWS-owned infrastructure rather than the public internet, completely satisfying the compliance requirement. Direct Connect also delivers consistent, predictable latency and bandwidth, because the path is dedicated rather than shared with unpredictable public internet congestion. AWS Site-to-Site VPN uses IPsec encryption to protect data in transit, but the underlying network path is the public internet. All traffic still passes through shared public infrastructure, which directly violates the compliance requirement that traffic must never traverse the public internet regardless of encryption status. Amazon CloudFront is a content delivery network designed to cache and accelerate content delivery to end users at edge locations. It does not provide a private connectivity path between an on-premises network and AWS compute or storage resources. VPC peering enables private routing between two AWS VPCs within or across accounts, but it only connects VPCs within the AWS network and cannot extend connectivity from an on-premises data center to AWS. Next up, question 7. Compare scope and condition. Northwind Core's finance team needs to accomplish 3 distinct cost management tasks: receive an email alert the moment monthly AWS spending on Amazon EC2 exceeds $10,000, review a visual breakdown of how much each AWS service cost over the past 6 months across all linked accounts, and estimate the projected monthly cost of a proposed new architecture that includes an application load balancer, 5 RDS instances, and an S3 bucket before any resources are deployed. Which AWS tools should the team use? Select 3. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are Option A, Option B, and Option D. 6 options, 3 right. Cost tools each do exactly one job. AWS Budgets enables teams to define custom cost and usage thresholds and receive automated alerts via email or Amazon SNS when actual or forecasted spending exceeds the defined limit. Creating a budget scope to EC2 with a $10,000 monthly threshold and an email action is exactly the purpose this service was designed for. AWS Cost Explorer provides interactive charts and filtering capabilities for visualizing historical AWS spending. It retains up to 12 months of cost data by default, and allows filtering by service, region, linked account, usage type, and tag, making it the correct tool for reviewing 6-month spending breakdowns across an AWS Organizations structure. AWS Pricing Calculator is a free web-based tool for modeling AWS architectures and generating cost estimates before any resources are deployed. Teams can add services, configure instance types and storage sizes, and receive a monthly cost estimate without incurring any charges or creating actual resources. AWS Cost and Usage Reports provides granular billing data delivered to an S3 bucket in CSV format for programmatic analysis. It does not send threshold alerts. AWS Trusted Advisor provides recommendations to optimize cost, performance, security, and fault tolerance by identifying idle or underutilized resources, but it does not provide historical spending trend visualizations. AWS Cost Explorer shows current and historical data for deployed resources, but is not designed for estimating the cost of architectures that do not yet exist. This question tests 3 different AWS billing tools. Let's lock in which one does what. Picture this. Your boss wants a bill alarm, a 6-month spending chart, and a cost quote for a design that hasn't been built yet. AWS gives you a different tool for each job. AWS Budgets is the alarm. Set $10,000 on EC2 and get an email the moment you cross it. Cost Explorer is the chart, 12 months of history, filtered by service, region, or linked account. AWS Pricing Calculator is the quote, model your load balancer, 5 database instances, and S3 bucket before you deploy anything. Here's the trap. Cost and Usage Reports delivers raw billing data to a storage bucket. It never fires alerts, and Trusted Advisor flags underused resources. It's not a spending trend chart. Now, question 8. Compare what is asked to what is offered. A cloud administrator at Tailspin Toys is establishing AWS account governance policies. The security policy requires that root user credentials are used only for tasks that require root-level access. Which two actions require use of the AWS root user account? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option B and option D. Root only means no IAM policy in the world grants it. Changing the AWS account name and primary contact email address are root-only operations that cannot be delegated to IAM users or roles regardless of the permissions they hold. Permanently closing an AWS account is also a root-only task, as it requires account-level authority that cannot be granted through IAM policies. Creating IAM users and assigning them to groups is a standard IAM administrative task available to any IAM principal with the appropriate IAM create user and IAM add user to group permissions. Attaching AWS managed policies to roles requires only IAM attach role policy permissions, which can be granted to any IAM user. Creating and configuring VPC resources requires network administration IAM permissions, not root credentials. Now, question 9 is up. Relic Cloud's engineering team runs an application on an auto-scaling group of 15 Amazon Linux EC2 instances. The application generates log files and shared configuration data that must be readable and writable by all 15 instances simultaneously. The shared storage must scale capacity automatically as data grows without any manual provisioning. Which AWS storage service should they use? Select 1. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. Concurrent Linux NFS mounts with automatic scaling fits exactly one service. Amazon EFS provides a fully managed elastic NFS file system that can be mounted concurrently by thousands of Amazon Linux EC2 instances across multiple availability zones. The file system automatically scales storage capacity up and down as files are added and removed, with no provisioning or capacity planning required, directly satisfying the shared concurrent access and automatic scaling requirements. Amazon EBS General Purpose SSD, GP3, volumes are block storage volumes attached to a single EC2 instance at a time. They cannot be simultaneously shared across multiple instances for concurrent read-write access in the way this application requires. Amazon S3 is object storage accessed via HTTP API calls, not as a mounted POSIX file system. Applications would require code changes to use the S3 API, and standard file system semantics needed for shared log files are not supported. Amazon FSx for Windows File Server provides fully managed SMB protocol file storage optimized for Windows workloads and Active Directory integration. It is not designed for Linux NFS workloads running on Amazon Linux EC2 instances. Let us keep moving. Question 10. Check whether it asks what or why. Tailspin Toys is decomposing a monolithic web application into microservices hosted on Amazon ECS. The application exposes 3 distinct back-end services through a single public endpoint: a product catalog API at the path/products, a shopping cart API at /cart, and a checkout API at /checkout. The team needs a load balancer that can inspect incoming HTTP requests and route each request to the appropriate backend service based entirely on the URL path. Which load balancer type should they deploy? Select 1. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. URL path inspection lives at layer 7, not layer 4. Application Load Balancer operates at layer 7 of the OSI model, which means it can inspect the full HTTP request, including the URL path, host header, query string parameters, and HTTP method, before making a routing decision. Path-based routing rules allow administrators to forward requests matching /products to one target group, /cart to another, and /checkout to a third, all behind a single listener. This is precisely the capability required to front multiple microservices from a single endpoint. Classic Load Balancer is a legacy service that operates at both Layer 4 and a limited Layer 7 mode. It offers only basic HTTP routing without the content-based path routing capabilities needed here, and AWS recommends against using it for new deployments. Network Load Balancer operates at Layer 4 and routes traffic based on IP address and TCP or UDP port information without inspecting the HTTP payload. It cannot evaluate URL paths and is designed for ultra-low latency, high throughput, static IP, or TLS pass-through scenarios rather than application layer content routing. Gateway Load Balancer is designed to deploy, scale, and manage third-party network virtual appliances such as firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and deep packet inspection tools. It is not intended for routing application traffic between microservices. Questions 6 through 10 locked in the cost tool trio. Pricing calculator estimates before deployment. Cost Explorer analyzes history, budgets alerts on thresholds. Direct Connect, not VPN, satisfies never traverse public internet. ALB handles path routing at Layer 7. Time for another one. Question 11. Picture the scenario first. Fabricom's research team runs computational genomics workloads on Amazon EC2. Each analysis job takes between 3 and 6 hours, and is engineered to save progress checkpoints to Amazon S3 every 30 minutes, enabling jobs to resume from the last checkpoint if interrupted. Jobs are submitted throughout the day and the team can tolerate delays of up to 2 hours when capacity is constrained. The primary goal is to minimize compute costs. Which EC2 purchasing option is most appropriate for this workload? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Checkpoints every 30 minutes plus delay tolerance, that combination means spot. Spot instances allow customers to access spare Amazon EC2 capacity at discounts of up to 90% compared to on-demand pricing, making them ideal for fault-tolerant, interruption-tolerant workloads. The genomics jobs satisfy all criteria for spot suitability. Checkpoints are saved to Amazon S3 every 30 minutes, so an interruption results in at most 30 minutes of repeated work when the job resumes. The team can tolerate delays when capacity is unavailable, and the jobs are batch processing workloads rather than interactive or latency-sensitive applications. When AWS needs the capacity back, spot instances receive a 2-minute interruption notice, providing sufficient time to complete a final checkpoint before shutdown. On-demand instances guarantee capacity without interruption risk but carry the highest per-hour price. They are appropriate when a workload cannot tolerate any delay or interruption, which is not the case here. Standard reserved instances reduce per-hour costs for workloads that run continuously and predictably around the clock. Research batch jobs that run intermittently throughout the day rather than continuously would leave reserved capacity idle for extended periods, reducing effective savings well below the headline discount. Dedicated hosts allocate a physical server exclusively to one customer, and are used for software licensing requirements or regulatory compliance scenarios demanding hardware isolation, not for cost optimization of interruptible batch workloads. Let us keep moving. Let's work question 12. A company's security team needs to determine which AWS account administrator changed an IAM policy that inadvertently granted excessive permissions to a developer role. Which AWS service provides an audit trail of this API-level activity? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Who changed what is the exact question Cloud Trail was built to answer. AWS Cloud Trail records all API calls made to AWS services, capturing details such as which principal made the call, from which IP address, which service was invoked, and what action was taken. CloudTrail is the correct tool when you need to answer who did what, specifically identifying which IAM user or role changed an IAM policy. Amazon CloudWatch monitors operational metrics, alarms, and application logs, but does not track which identity performed a specific API action. AWS Config continuously tracks the configuration state of AWS resources over time and can detect configuration drift, but it is designed to answer whether a resource is configured correctly rather than identifying the actor who performed a change. Amazon GuardDuty uses machine learning to detect threats and anomalous behavior within the AWS environment, but does not provide a detailed API call audit trail for compliance and security investigations. Ready. Question 13. Check the condition before the service. Woodgrove Bank's security team has identified a range of IP addresses linked to a known threat actor that is probing resources within a VPC. The team must block all traffic originating from this IP range at the subnet boundary before it can reach any EC2 instances, even if instance-level rules would otherwise permit the traffic. Which network control should they configure? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Security groups cannot deny, only NACLs support explicit block rules. Network access control lists are stateless, subnet-level firewall rules that evaluate each packet independently. Unlike security groups, NACLs support explicit DNI rules. By inserting a DNI rule with a lower rule number, meaning higher evaluation priority, than any existing ALLO rules, all traffic from the malicious IP range is dropped at the subnet boundary before reaching any instance in that subnet. Security groups are stateful and support only ALLO rules. There is no mechanism to add an explicit deny. If a source IP is not explicitly permitted, it is implicitly denied, but security groups operate at the instance level, not the subnet boundary. Amazon GuardDuty is a threat detection service that analyzes log data and generates security findings, but does not take autonomous network action to block traffic. GuardDuty findings require a separate remediation workflow such as a Lambda function to trigger blocking. AWS WAF is a Layer 7 web application firewall that inspects HTTP and HTTPS requests in front of application load balancers, CloudFront distributions, or API gateway. It does not operate at the VPC subnet level and cannot control general IP layer network traffic. Let's slow down on this one. The qualifier phrases are doing all the work here. Picture a bank. A known attacker is probing your network from a block of 256 suspicious IPs. The question says stop them at the subnet boundary, which is your first clue. Only NACLs, network access control lists, operate at the subnet level. Security groups work per instance. Then read this phrase carefully. Even if instance-level rules would otherwise permit the traffic. That line kills every instance-level answer. Security groups are also out. They have no deny mechanism at all. They only support ALLO rules. NACLs support explicit deny. Low rule number means it fires first, before any ALLO. That's why C wins. NACLs are the only subnet-level firewall with explicit deny. Ready? Question 14. Map the qualifier to the answer. Adatum Retail runs an e-commerce platform that experiences extreme traffic spikes during holiday sales events, requiring approximately 10 times normal server capacity for 48-hour periods. Immediately after each event, demand returns to baseline levels and the extra capacity serves no purpose. The company wants their infrastructure to adjust automatically to these demand patterns without manual intervention. Which characteristic of cloud computing best describes this capability? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. Scale up and down automatically. That phrase defines elasticity precisely. Elasticity is the cloud characteristic that enables infrastructure to automatically scale resources up during periods of high demand and scale back down when demand subsides, precisely matching resource consumption to actual need at any given moment. AWS services such as EC2 auto-scaling, AWS Lambda, and DynamoDB on-demand mode embody elasticity. This capability is particularly valuable for seasonal e-commerce workloads, where capacity requirements swing dramatically over short intervals. High availability minimizes downtime through redundancy across zones or regions, but does not address dynamic capacity adjustment based on traffic load. Fault tolerance extends high availability by enabling systems to continue operating with zero interruption despite hardware failures, but also does not involve scaling capacity in response to demand. Durability refers to data preservation and protection against data loss over time, such as Amazon S3's 11 nines of object durability, and is unrelated to compute capacity scaling. Let us switch gears. Question 15. Identify the business need first. Adata Media operates a global video streaming platform with origin servers deployed in the US East 1 and EU West 1 regions. The requirements are that viewers must be automatically directed to whichever region provides them the lowest network latency, and if either region fails its health checks, all traffic must immediately route to the remaining healthy region. Which Amazon Route 53 routing policy satisfies both requirements? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. Lowest latency plus automatic failover. One routing policy covers both. Latency-based routing directs each user's DNS query to the AWS region that provides the lowest measured network latency from that user's location, which in practice corresponds to the geographically nearest region for most users worldwide. When combined with Route 53 health checks, latency-based routing automatically removes unhealthy endpoints from DNS responses and directs traffic to the next lowest latency healthy region, satisfying the automatic failover requirement without any manual intervention. Simple routing supports only a single record per name without health check integration for failover and cannot route based on latency or user location. Weighted routing distributes traffic across endpoints according to administrator-defined percentage weights. It does not automatically optimize for the lowest latency connection, and would send a fixed portion of traffic to a failed region until the weights are manually adjusted. Geolocation routing directs users based on their detected geographic origin, such as country or continent, which can serve region-specific content, but does not measure or optimize for actual network latency, and explicit rules must be configured for every geographic origin to be covered. CloudTrail answers who did what in API history. NACLs add an explicit DNI at subnet level. Security groups can't do that. Spot instances win whenever a job checkpoints and tolerates short delays. The cost tool trio appeared a second time with the same three answers. Let us switch gears. Question 16. Pick the complete answer. A company's cloud finance team needs to accomplish three distinct cost management tasks. Estimate the monthly cost of a proposed new three-tier architecture before it is built. Analyze historical spending patterns over the past 6 months to identify which services are driving the highest costs, and receive an automated email alert when projected monthly spending is on track to exceed a defined threshold. Which three AWS services satisfy these three requirements respectively? Select 3. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A, option B, and option C. Same three tools appear again. Recognize the trio and move fast. AWS Pricing Calculator allows teams to model proposed AWS architectures and estimate monthly costs before deploying any resources. By configuring expected service usage, instance types, storage volumes, and data transfer, teams receive cost projections for new workloads with no charges incurred. AWS Cost Explorer provides an interactive graphical interface for analyzing historical AWS spending with filtering by service, linked account, tag, region, and time period. It surfaces cost trends, identifies high-spend services, and offers right-sizing recommendations, making it the appropriate tool for the retrospective spending analysis requirement. AWS Budgets enables teams to define spending or usage thresholds and configure automated alerts delivered via email or Amazon SNS when actual or forecasted spend reaches defined percentages of the budget amount, directly satisfying the proactive alerting requirement. AWS Cost and Usage Report delivers the most granular raw billing data available as files exported to Amazon S3, but it requires additional tooling such as Amazon Athena or Amazon QuickSight to query and visualize the data. It is not an interactive analysis or alerting tool on its own. AWS Trusted Advisor evaluates the existing AWS environment against best practices and identifies idle or underutilized resources as cost optimization recommendations, but it does not estimate costs for proposed architectures. AWS Compute Optimizer uses machine learning to recommend optimal instance sizes for EC2, Lambda, and ECS workloads based on utilization patterns, but it focuses on efficiency recommendations rather than cost estimation for new architectures or threshold-based budget alerts. Keep your focus here. Question 17. The trap is in the setup. A newly hired cloud administrator at Litware Solutions has just created a new AWS account. Before provisioning any infrastructure, the security manager asks the administrator to immediately secure the root user account following AWS best practices. Which two actions should the administrator take first? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option D. Root access keys should never exist. Eliminate that answer immediately. Enabling multi-factor authentication on the root user is the most critical immediate action after account creation. MFA prevents unauthorized access even if root credentials are stolen, and AWS explicitly recommends phishing-resistant MFA methods such as passkeys or hardware security keys. Creating an IAM user or role with appropriately scoped permissions ensures all routine and administrative tasks are performed without ever using root credentials, following the principle of least privilege and limiting root exposure to a narrow set of tasks that truly require it, such as changing account email, managing the support plan, or closing the account. Generating access keys for the root user is explicitly prohibited by AWS best practices. Programmatic root access creates an unscoped, high-risk credential that cannot be restricted to specific services or operations and should never be created. Sharing root credentials violates the principle of individual accountability and creates an extreme security risk if any one person's access is compromised. The root user cannot be added to IAM groups. It exists entirely outside the IAM identity model, and IAM group memberships do not apply to it. Let's slow down here. Securing the root account is the very first thing AWS wants you to do. Imagine you just got handed the master key to a building. You don't copy it and pass it around. You add a deadbolt, then make key cards for daily use. Same deal with AWS Root. Root can do literally anything. Close your account, delete every S3 bucket, override every permission. So step 1. Enable MFA on root the moment you create the account. Step 2. Create an IAM user or role for your daily admin work. Now root lives in a vault. Option B is the trap. Generating root access keys sounds handy. AWS says never do it. Root keys can't be restricted to specific services. Option E is flat out impossible. Root can't join an IAM group. 2 right moves, 2 traps. That's the question. Keep your focus here. Now for question 18. A startup is designing a new 3-tier web application on AWS that will include EC2 instances, an Amazon RDS database, an application load balancer, and inter-service data transfer. Before deploying any resources, the team lead wants to produce a detailed estimate of the expected monthly AWS bill to present to investors. No existing AWS usage or account history is available. Which AWS tool should the team use? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. No existing account, no usage data, pre-deployment, only one tool fits. AWS Pricing Calculator is a free, web-based planning tool that allows teams to model and estimate the monthly cost of AWS services before any resources are deployed. Users configure individual service parameters such as instance type, operating system, AWS region, storage size, and expected data transfer volumes, and the calculator produces a detailed itemized cost estimate that can be exported and shared. It is the correct tool for pre-deployment cost modeling when no historical usage data exists. AWS Cost Explorer is an analytics and visualization service for analyzing historical and current AWS spending patterns. It requires actual account usage data to generate cost reports, and cannot estimate costs for services or architectures that have not yet been deployed. AWS Budgets allows teams to define spending thresholds and receive alerts when actual or forecasted costs exceed configured limits. It monitors existing AWS spend rather than modeling costs for new deployments, and has no capability to estimate costs before resources exist. AWS Cost and Usage Report delivers the most granular billing data available by exporting detailed line item records to Amazon S3 for custom analysis with tools like Athena or QuickSight. Like Cost Explorer, it depends on existing usage data and is a retrospective reporting tool, not a prospective cost estimation solution for new architectures. All right, question 19. The trap is partial correctness. Tailspin Toys operates a globally accessible online gaming platform hosted on AWS. The security team has identified two distinct threat vectors: large-scale volumetric network attacks that flood their servers with malicious traffic, and application layer attacks that inject malicious SQL code into their API endpoints. The team needs AWS native services to address both threat types. Which two services should they deploy? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option B and option D. DDoS and SQL injection are two separate attack layers needing two services. AWS Shield protects AWS-hosted applications against distributed denial-of-service attacks, which are volumetric network layer and transport layer attacks that overwhelm infrastructure with malicious traffic. Shield Standard is automatically included at no additional charge for all AWS customers and defends against common Layer 3 and Layer 4 attacks. Shield Advanced provides enhanced detection, 24/7 access to the DDoS response team, and financial protection against scaling costs incurred during DDoS events. AWS WAF is a web application firewall that inspects HTTP and HTTPS traffic at Layer 7 and blocks common application layer exploits, including SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and other AWS Top 10 vulnerabilities using configurable rule groups and AWS managed rules. Shield and WAF serve complementary roles. Shield handles volumetric DDoS attacks while WAF handles malicious application layer payloads. WAF does not protect against DDoS and Shield does not block application exploits. Amazon Guard Duty is a continuous threat detection service that uses machine learning to analyze CloudTrail events, VPC flow logs, and DNS logs for suspicious behavior inside the AWS environment. It does not intercept or block inbound web traffic in real time. Amazon Macie uses machine learning to discover and protect sensitive data stored in Amazon S3 and is not a traffic filtering service. AWS Config continuously audits resource configurations against desired compliance states, but provides no active traffic protection capability. Okay, Question 20. Pay attention to what is really asked. A cloud architect is explaining two distinct architectural goals to Northwind Bank's IT leadership. The first goal is to ensure the payment processing system remains available 99.99% of the time, allowing a brief recovery period after a failure. The second goal is to ensure the core trading system has zero downtime, even during a component failure, by having redundant components absorb failures instantly. Which two architectural concepts do these goals describe? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option B and option D. 99.99% with brief recovery versus instant absorption, two different architectural goals. High availability describes the goal of minimizing downtime so that a system remains operational the vast majority of the time, measured by uptime percentages such as 99.99%. A highly available system may experience a brief recovery period after a failure, but recovers quickly. Fault tolerance describes the architectural goal of zero downtime, where redundant components are designed so that a failure in one component is seamlessly absorbed by another without any interruption to users. Fault tolerance is more expensive to implement than high availability because it requires fully redundant systems running in parallel at all times. Elasticity refers to the ability to automatically scale resources in both directions based on demand. Scalability is the general ability to handle increased load, and may be manual or automatic. Durability refers to data persistence, how well data is protected from loss over time, such as Amazon S3's 11 nines of durability. 3 takeaways from this session. First, MemoryDB persists data across node failures. Elastic cache is ephemeral cache that loses data on restart. Second, Pricing Calculator estimates before deployment. Cost Explorer analyzes history, budgets triggers threshold alerts. Third, fault tolerance means zero downtime via redundant components. High availability allows a brief recovery period. The cost tool trio, the HA versus fault tolerance distinction, and the MemoryDB versus elastic cache durability gap, these patterns repeat on the real exam. You just stress tested all of them. Keep that momentum going.